Welcome to Construction Genius. My name is Eric Anderton, and this week's episode features an interview with Andrew Silverstein, the Vice President of Metralite Industries, an architectural metal and glass subcontractor out of New York City. Andrew is the third-generation Silverstein in the business, and as he's come into the family business through an unusual career path, he's learning how change happens in construction companies and how he, as a young leader, can show up with humility, with a real commitment to hard work, and an understanding of how he best learns in order to bring value to the organization. You'll find this interview with Andrew extremely interesting, particularly if you're going through a transition in your construction company, whether it be a family-based one or not. We dive into how he has grown in his role, how he's learning the business, and where he sees the company going in the future. So enjoy this interview with Andrew, and I'd really appreciate it if you could share this interview with other people if you find it interesting and you think that they might benefit from hearing it as well. Please give us a rating or a review wherever you get your podcasts. And again, thank you for listening to Construction Genius. Feel free to connect with me through my website, ericanderton.com, or on LinkedIn. And thanks again for listening to Construction Genius. This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership. Welcome to Construction Genius. My guest today is Andrew Silverstein, the Vice President of Metralite out of New York City, New York. I noticed, Andrew, on your address that you're in Flushing, New York?
Yes.
When did you last get out to the U.S. Open there?
Oh, not often enough, but I went this past year, and it's great.
That's great. That's great. Well, you know, I'm really excited to have you on the show today, and the reason why is I was checking out your biography on LinkedIn. You have a very interesting path into the construction industry. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how you went from the University of Pennsylvania through a teaching career and then into this construction company, Metralite?
Definitely. Well, Eric, thanks for having me on. My name is Andrew Silverstein. I'm 29 years old, and I'm the Vice President of Metralite Industries. We're an architectural metal and glass firm in New York City. We're based in Flushing, so yes, go Mets. And we do work in New York City. I'd say 90% of our work is corporate interiors in Manhattan. I grew up in a small town on Long Island from a close-knit family. I went to an excellent public school. I then studied politics and government in college. And out of college, I joined Teach for America, which is a nationwide program that places recent graduates in low-income and under-resourced neighborhoods. And so I was placed in the South Bronx, which is among the poorest neighborhoods in the United States, and at a school, classical charter schools, that's very innovative. So they do a lot of experimentation. They have a longer school day, longer school year, and a ton of feedback to young teachers. At that point, I joined my family's multi-generational construction company. My family has been in metal and glass through different companies for 4 generations. And so as I was leaving the school, I decided I wanted to join my family's legacy company and support and learn from my father. At the school, I started as an assistant teacher. I got a ton of feedback. I became a classroom teacher, then a grade level chair, and then the dean of students at the school. And I decided I wanted to go and really try out the private sector. And so at that point, my father and I sat down and we thought, you know, here's a company that has great foundations, but could go into a really cool direction under your leadership. So I've been there now for the last 3 years, and it's been a lot of fun.
So let me ask you, what was it about the business? Because if I'm right here, your grandfather and your father started the business. What was it about it that was sort of drawing you in? Why was it that you wanted to get back into the private sector? Because it seems like you were having quite a contribution there in the school there that you were involved in.
Yeah, so my heart lies in public service, but I live in Manhattan, and I always felt like there's something that's really being built, and I was building family, a community. I was building a school, and on the other side, on the private sector side, my father was building this company and contributing to building New York City, and he was able to walk around and say, "Hey, I built that. I did this entrance. I built this building." And it's tangible. And so as I was thinking about what's next for me, what skills do I need as a leader, whether it's at a school or elsewhere, I decided that this would be a perfect way for me to build to my family's legacy as builders in Manhattan, and also, really feel like I can build something that one could look at and point and say, "Hey, I did that."
It's interesting because there's many construction companies, obviously, that are family based, and they have different family members involved in the company. As you came into the business, in your mid-20s, having a completely different background from construction, how did the folks who were involved in the day-to-day, who'd been involved in the business for a while, how did they respond to the president's son coming into the company?
Yeah, well, certainly there's nepotism involved. Since I was in middle school, my grandfather passed away, and my dad started asking me questions, just bouncing ideas off me. "Hey, what do you think about reshuffling this department? Well, I'm considering doing this." As just a thought leader, much of business is common sense and just thinking something out loud and trying ideas out with another person. And so I was that person for my dad. And so for years, I was his unofficial board of directors, just talking through different ideas. And all of our employees have been with us for, we have a lot of employees who've been with us since before I was born, who were at my birth. And so they were excited. I imagine there are people who enter family businesses where fellow employees feel rivalries or resentment. Thankfully, I entered a company that everyone was really excited when I joined. And even if it's as I'm moving the company in a different direction, I have the privilege to really set that, and the people I work with are really receptive.
So let me just take you back then, because I find that interesting. So your dad is beginning to bounce ideas off of you about the company. Your grandfather passed, and so obviously, like a lot of CEOs, they need an outside sounding board from the day-to-day grind. How old were you when he was starting to bounce those ideas off of you?
Yeah, that's right. So I'm probably around 14 years old through my time in college. So Let me ask you another question. I'm really interested in exploring this because, so if I'm your dad, your typical father, they obviously when you have your own business, your guts are in it, your life, your soul, your blood, and then you think about your children. And on the one hand, perhaps you think, wow, what I do is awesome. It'd be great to have them involved. And then on the other hand, you're thinking, I'm not sure I want to, put them in a box. I want to make sure they have an opportunity to do their thing. So how do you feel your father worked through maybe that dynamic? Give us some input there. Yeah, so I was not one of those children who was walking around the factories cleaning it up. I know there are a lot of construction executives who say, "Hey, I've been doing this since I was 2 years old." I was actually very much not that. My dad said, "This has been with us forever. Use it if you want. Join. We'd love to have you. And if not, go pursue your dreams in whatever you wish." But he didn't need that outside consultant, right? Whether a 14-year-old consultant, right? Just to say, "Hey, I'm considering moving this person from this department there. What do you think?" And just to ask, having an outside sounding board is helpful to anybody.
Did you know these people that he was asking you about?
Yeah, of course. I mean, some of them I've known my whole life, and I work with a lot of people who I've known my whole life, which is really special.
That's interesting. Okay, so then you're in college. Then you move into the teaching. How would you describe the way you and your dad discussed you coming into the company? Give us some feedback on that.
So we sat down at a diner, and
which diner, by the way?
I don't remember, but it was one of those classic 1950s diners. So over some scrambled eggs, we just discussed, as one, is this a good option? in general? 2, is it a good option for me personally? And 3, what the dynamics would look like. I always say that, you can hate your boss, and you can hate your dad, but you don't want to, right? Especially if your relationship is really positive, and my dad and I are best friends. So, to manage that relationship tightly, like any relationship, like any marriage, right? A business partnership needs to really be protected. But I think his thought was also there's ultimate loyalty. And so from the time I was little, loyalty has been a huge part of the Silverstein creed. And so he knew that if I were to join, there would be a really nice, loyal bond in an industry that can be rough.
Yep. Yeah. So as you were making that decision to jump from the teaching world into the construction world, it sounds like you were making that connection about building the lives of the kids that you were working with, building the buildings and leaving a tangible, tactile legacy. Was that something that really motivated you and inspired you?
I wanted to learn business skills. I found that learning business schools and running a school is not the same. A school, by definition, is non-for-profit. And so to have those financial constraints on an organization, I wanted to learn. Like, I thought that was my next challenge. I felt like I really dominated the classroom setting. Then as an administrator, I was part of a very successful organization. I wanted to see what else is out there. And that's kind of where I fit into Metralite.
So as you've been in the business now for a few years, describe what the first year was like coming into the business, obviously not being the kid who was sweeping up the warehouse or, working on the job sites in the summer. Tell us about that first year.
Yeah, so I wear 3 primary hats at the moment in my current job. The first hat is which is about 80% of my job, is that I lead the estimating and sales departments. And that's really where I do my learning. I learn the basics. So like in anything, you need to learn a language, right? In construction, there's a language that you need to learn. The second hat that I wear is overseeing the operations and day-to-day. I don't purchase the material, I don't install the material, but I oversee to make sure that the resources are going where they need to go, that the trains are running on time, and that comes from really a son's duty to start to shield dad from the thicket of operational nonsense and chaos of a company, and seek to reduce that. And the third hat I wear, my first hat, estimating and sales, is about 80% of my job. The second hat is operations, and that's about 10% of my job. And the third part, the hat I wear, is modernizing, where I really do my teaching. And so I'm in a company of baby movers in a industry that's ripe for disruption. And about 10% of my day is thinking critically about where our company is, where the industry is going, and how we can lead the industry.
So let me look at that just for a moment. So when I think about a construction company, I think about 3 aspects in general. Number 1, you've got to get the work, right? So you've got to bid and win work. Number 2, you've got to build it profitably. And number 3, you've got to build the work or get paid for the work that you do. That's right. When you think about the bringing critical thinking to the way that the businesses run and modernization opportunities, which, if any of those 3, do you find the most opportunity in? So a lot of the innovations that I've done has been in estimating and sales, because that's what I'm in control of. Okay. It's a lot harder to innovate on an area that you're not overseeing. So your third part, the billing and collection, is actually an area of the company that I'm not involved in yet. Perhaps in the coming year, perhaps in the next 2 years. But in terms of the bidding and getting work and operations, most of my innovation has been over the last 3 years in the estimating and sales, because that's what I've been training in. In the operations, that's where I'm going next. This coming year is all about, for me, modernizing the areas of the company for which I do not oversee. Okay, so let's go back to the estimating and the sales. As you got into that part of the business, got your arms around it, what was one area or two areas that you saw, we really need to make some changes here?
Yeah, so I'm a teacher in my bones. I loved it, and I think as a teacher often. And so teachers know how one learns. And the question is, how do you acquire a skill that you don't know, right? And whether it's math for a fourth grader or cutting glass for a glazier, right? How do you master a skill? And so part of estimating in sales is developing true knowledge of construction. And so I think a lot about how for estimating and for selling, how do we build a project? What is the nature of our value add to the construction industry?
Okay, so that's a good question then, because that's an essential thing in terms of selling. If you're going to sell something, you've got to solve a problem and you've got to add value. So how do you describe, or how have you refined the description of the value that you add to your customers in such a way that it's had an impact upon your estimating and sales success?
Yeah, so I've actually narrowed our scope. So I've specialized in certain ways. So we used to do 30% storefronts and 70% corporate interiors. I've dwindled down the storefronts to less than 5% of our total revenue. It's just not the area that we are as expert in. So it's a matter of just knowing where, for me, it's been just evaluating where is the company, what direction do I want it to go in. Perhaps in a year from now, I'm going to realize that, hey, that one storefront we did, that was extremely profitable and extremely easy. Maybe that's the direction we should go in. Or perhaps it's in retail or something else. I don't know that yet, but I do think a lot about, where is the department focusing its resources? How can I shift it as the company needs it?
So as you made that shift in terms of, from going from 30% to 5% in terms of the storefronts, that's a strategic decision in terms of your niche. As you were introducing that thinking into the company, as you were discussing it, what kind of resistance did you experience from the folks within the organization, if any?
On that one, not much. And we could talk a little bit more about the modernizing in terms of resistance. But I have yet to get any resistance on shifting our resources.
Okay, so then let's explore that a little bit. So you're 29. You're a self-described millennial. You're almost Generation Z here, man. I tell you. But then you're working with a bunch of baby boomers. So here you come. You're not only a millennial, but you're the son of the president. What did you do to position yourself to make the changes that you wanted to make, the modernizing? What have you done to position yourself in such a way so that people are receptive to what you have to say?
Yeah. So Darwin was right. Evolution is nature's most powerful law. You either learn or you die. An organism either adapts to the environment or it goes extinct. So I've leveraged my privilege and the recognition that I'm the owner's son. It's no secret. And I think most importantly, it's demonstrating humility. I've gotten used to being in a room of 20 plus people who have 20 plus years experience just to say, you know what, I don't understand what you just said. Explain it one more time, please. And then have them explain it a second time and then say, you know what, I still don't understand. And then they explain it a third time. And I think the demonstration of humility and recognizing that smart people are not afraid to look stupid. And, I think that goes a long way. People respect when you own your own knowledge gaps. And so for me, it's just having immense humility on the technical side. Now, when it comes to how you create change in a company, creating change in a company is hard. It depends, right? In some organizations, you have a machine that's adaptive, right? Think about Google. They're constantly tinkering and experimenting, and changes result from it. Most organizations are static. Most organizations do the same thing year after year and don't change all that much. When I was in college, I I studied military organizations. You said I studied political science, and military organizations historically don't change very much. They're constantly fighting the last war in terms of technology.
Right.
But in order to win a war, a military needs to adapt to changing times and needs to bring on new technology. So usually what happens is you don't have a change until some sort of a military maverick, someone who's rose through traditional means, and then creates changes at the top. And so one example of that is Admiral Rickover was this traditional admiral. He was on boats his whole life. And then he said, what we really need is nukes on submarines.
Right.
And he was able to create that change from the top. So and that happens in all over, the world, right? So that think about like Ellen DeGeneres with the LGBTQ community, right? So she demonstrates who she is, and then perceptions change accordingly. I did that at my school where, I was a traditional teacher, and it took till I became a dean to say, like the rest of the country, we have a challenge that we are suspending Black boys more than other demographics of children. And so I was only able to have that credibility because I was a teacher for so many years. And so I said, hey, let's do something about that. And you can create that change once you have that credibility.
So
now, in order to have that credibility.
Yeah, let me just ask you this question about, so you take Google, for instance, right? And if I'm a construction guy, you're saying, I'm saying, that's Google. They got billions of dollars. They can put their guys over here. They're in the corner. They can give them 20% of their time to work on new ideas and their moonshots and stuff like that, because people keep clicking on ads and they've got this perpetual generation of money. I'm a construction guy. I've got to get the next project. I've got to put my house on the line if I'm the owner of the company signing the contract. I'm taking immense risk on board. I just don't have time to take the risk to tinker and to innovate. I just need to get the next project built. Yeah. How have you addressed that kind of traditional thinking that many construction companies struggle with, and that's why construction tends to innovate at a slower pace than other industries?
Yeah, and it also struggles to innovate because there's high barriers to entry. So you don't have, unlike the tech industry, you're not having a new architectural metal and glass firm in New York City pop up every other year that forces change, right? But your question's 100% correct, right? So I think it's a fallacy to think that most problems have financial solutions. I think most challenges require small changes that can slowly change. So it's a lot. I'd say if you go to Google, they'll say, hey, we spent all this money and we have this brand new program, right? We are launching it all at once. In construction, or at least in my company, what I've found is we're going to set a big goal and we're going to slowly tinker over time. We're going to have that a slow change towards getting to an end state. I also think having a mountaintop to climb and saying that's where we're going ends up really bringing a company together. But your point is right. It's how do you innovate when you're just trying to keep your head above water? Most challenges don't require financial solutions, and most challenges don't require all that much time-based solutions, right?
Okay, so let me ask you about that, because I think that's really interesting. Because on the one hand, you paint a big picture, or you say, hey, this is a big mountain we've got to climb. But then on the other hand, you're saying, and the way we're going to climb it is by just taking one step at a time. Okay. Right. Now, so can you give me an example of a small change that has been introduced in your company that you found to have a significant impact?
Yeah. So our one of our big goals is communication, right? Like any other construction company, that remains a huge problem. I came in, we had all those long email chains where people are fighting and trying to figure things out. And so I doubled down on communication and having transparency with our general contractors. So at first, what that looked like was I sent an email to everybody with just, here's where our status is, right? Low tech, right? It didn't require any money. It required 10 minutes a day of me just saying, this is where our status is. And then people would follow up and have questions. And so then it's a matter of, okay, so so-and-so who's CC'd on the email, you need to reply because that's in your department, and slowly getting other people on board. It's not this is a tech-based solution. It's not, I'm not going to win some Nobel Prize in technology for having communicating project status on via email, but it slowly moves the dial towards this big goal of, I want our GCs I want to be fully transparent with our GCs so that there's not ambiguity, and I found that the GCs love it.
Okay, so that's a good question there. So you're working with your GCs, and again, so let me put myself in the shoes of one of my clients who's a sub, and I agree, I want to be transparent with my GCs, but how transparent do I want to be with my GCs? There's some things. It's always
a fine line. You don't need every GC to know how the sausage is made, but you do need to know. You need to guard. For instance, for us, we have a lot of long lead time items, so it's about guarding dates. If you need to be done in 5 weeks, and I have a 4-week lead time item, then I need to let everybody know that we're going to have an issue if something's not released for fabrication. And that's just about counting backwards. It's not a lot of the changes that I feel that need to be made at our company, and I imagine I'm not the only one. It does not require some huge software program, but it does require slow growth towards a big audacious goal.
Okay, so that's interesting because when we think about change in construction, many times people are thinking about it in terms of technology or apps or offsite construction or something like that. But you really honed it down there to, in my mind, what is the biggest issue for most construction companies, all things being equal in terms of technical skill, it is the companies that communicate the best that are the most profitable and the most stable and successful. So it's interesting that you would focus in on communication.
Yeah, and I think you got to fish where there are fish. You need to meet people where they are. And so therefore you need to build tools that people can handle, right? It would be naive for me to say, hey, I'm 29 and you're 55. This is a new platform and I want you to update it every single day, and I want you to do information work like I do and my generation does. It's not fair. It also won't happen. It's not realistic. So it's about tech adoption for technophobes. How do you need to be able to work with people where they are. It's no different than when I was a teacher. I would work with families to help them read with their children. Yep. So I would have parent learning academies. And so initially I had it at 4 p.m. on a Tuesday. Most of the families that I worked with work at 4 p.m. on a Tuesday. So I would have it at night. And a lot of the families I worked with didn't speak English, and my Spanish is terrible, so I would have a translator. It's about meeting people where they are to move the dial to where you as a leader ultimately want them to go.
So that's practical humility right there, because the proud person would say, you need to adapt to me, whereas the humble person has the goal in mind and yet is willing to adapt to others in order to bring them towards that goal.
That's right, and it requires making mistakes and being okay with that. Ray Dalio of Bridgewater Associates says you have to be comfortable with mistakes. You dent the car, scratch the car, don't total the car, don't let your company go bankrupt over a mistake, but make enough mistakes that you're learning and growing. And when somebody brings you their mistakes, be very conscious of how you're responding to it, because whether you have...
Let me just interrupt. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I find that interesting. What would you say is the biggest mistake you've made since you've come into the business?
Yeah, so I rolled out this very sophisticated Microsoft Excel-based platform for our team. And I trained everybody, I showed them how it worked, and nobody used it because, right? And thankfully I didn't spend huge sums of money, but right? But ultimately, that's not where they were, right? It was way too sophisticated. So ultimately, I decided what I need to do is I need I need to get them there. I know where I want them to go. I know I want them to be on sophisticated project management software.
Right.
It's going to take time to get there. First, it's about, okay, my department that I run, my estimating and sales needs to be fully integrated. And then slowly I'm going to go into the departments, which I don't oversee, and work with them and build that out. So the past 6 months, it's all about submittals. Our drafting department is now completely integrated with our software program. It took a lot of time. So when I was building the program for me and estimating, I worked with our administrative assistant to change it every day. I'd walk into her office and say, the thing I told you yesterday, scrap that. We're going to do something slightly different. And that took a lot of patience on her end. Finally, I knew where I wanted to go for me. Then it's about adapting the technology for another department and working with them. And it's slowly having small wins that you can know where you want to go.
See, this is great. So in terms of, this is really, really important because you can use this principle as a means of adopting all kinds of technology where you start small, you focus on getting some wins, you don't try and change the world in one fell swoop, and you tinker as you go before rolling it out to the entire company.
That's right. And you have to be the model, right? If you want a company that learns, you need to learn. If you want a company that's humble, you need to be humble. In business and faith and life, as both nations and individuals, you need to be the city on the hill. You need to be the change you wish to see in your company or in the world, right? That's the only way the change happens, is by modeling the changes that you want.
Yeah, that's very powerful. I think that's something for us as leaders to always keep in mind, is that the folks around us are going to be imitating the way that we behave. And so if we present that model of humility, that model of adaptability, that model of patience, that is something that they're going to be able to imitate and emulate in their own lives as well. So let me take you back to this communication piece, because one of the big complaints that I get from old school construction guys is that the millennials are experts at emails, but many of them, and forgive the strong language, they don't have the balls to get in the truck and drive out to the job site and go belly to belly with a scary superintendent and really have the difficult conversation, or at least pick up the phone and have a difficult conversation. What has your experience been with having those perhaps more confrontational moments with different generations as you're growing and learning in the construction business?
So in education, there's a lot of PC culture. If you don't mind, please, when you have a minute, do me a favor and do this. Yeah, right. In construction, it's do this now or you're fired, right? That's the cultures could not be more stark. And those people are right. The people, as you were voicing their feeling, the executive who's 29 who doesn't actually know how to build a thing himself, right? I think that's a very fair criticism. My argument to that is, when I started at Metralite, these kinds of difficult conversations were happening on a daily basis, where because we weren't thinking through project management programs, and because we weren't thinking 5 weeks ahead for a 4-week lead time, 2 weeks to go in the project, we need to get a 4-week lead time item done, and there were screaming matches, right? I think the more, and it doesn't have to be tech-based, the more thoughtfulness and tools that you bring, whether it could be a calendar, right? The less chaos, the less argumentation there ought to be. So I found that, in my first year, I was going down to job sites and getting in screaming matches with supers a lot because, well, I needed to earn my stripes. In year 3 now, it's about, how do I have less of those? How do we develop tools for people so that doesn't happen as often? Right.
It's interesting. So what kind of, as you're beginning to grow into the company, and as you're thinking about the future of the business, where are you looking to recruit new talent into the organization, to as the older generation begins to head towards retirement, and you see the need to fill in with newer talent?
It's our number one concern. So any listeners out there who are interested in architectural metal and glass, please reach out. We are definitely trying to recruit for the next era. And I want a team in my image, right? Our current team is built in the image of my dad, and they're excellent. We have some real construction geniuses on our team. How do you develop those skills that took a career to build in our generation, a generation who is less inclined to join what is a less sexy industry, right? Yep. But ultimately can provide a great livelihood, pay really nicely, and have something that you can really tangibly touch and feel proud for. So yeah, it's our number one concern is building a team for the future and finding the people who you would want, people who are humble, who want to learn, who are reflective about where the industry is going and how we can contribute to it. It's something I think about every day.
So where are you looking? So typically I know, a lot of the construction folks I work with, when they're looking for project managers, they'll go to the CM schools, the construction management schools in the local universities, or go to the vocational schools for folks in the field, perhaps. Do you look at any alternative sources in terms of tapping into talent? Because again, you came from, the poli-sci background to a teaching background to construction. Now, obviously your path was in some ways made because of the family connection, but are there any alternative places that you might look as a construction company to find talent other than the typical places?
So when I was a teacher, unlike most schools, my assistant principal was in my classroom every day. Mm-hmm. And some classes I taught were excellent, and some classes I taught were not. And I got that feedback on every single class that I taught, which is really powerful. It's how you get a first-year teacher to be expert by the end of the year. And so having that full transparency with you to say that was a success and that was a failure is critical to who I am at this point. It's a core value. So that's a long answer to that. I have not found success in this yet. So When I do find somebody and another source of talent, I'll be sure to let you know. Because
that's great. That's great. That's awesome.
Been hard.
So what is it about the construction industry that makes it a compelling career opportunity for a young person, do you feel?
I'd say tangibly, financially, it's a great industry to be in. You look around, we have crumbling roads and bridges. We have schools that need or that are in desperate need of repair. The construction world has never been needed more. Both construction and education are not sexy career paths. And to stand in front of 20 children all day long and teach math is really hard. To be a carpenter on a job site all day long is really hard, right? It's really hard work. But I think in that challenge and in that rigor is a sense of pride, right? I always say my former co-teachers are like war buddies to me, right? We've been in the trenches together. I see that same camaraderie among my rank and file, right? Yeah. We worked our tails off and look at what we created. This is a gorgeous office for a company, and people will go and they'll shoot movies in the offices that we built. That's a sense of pride that I think is very attractive to people. I tell all of my friends, you guys should become union carpenters, ironworkers, and glaziers. It's a great setup.
That's beautiful. Yeah, so those three things there I got there was number one, the financial aspect, and I 100% agree with you there. Number two is the camaraderie that comes from working together in difficult situations. And then the third thing there is that contribution, the fact that you can drive down the street and you can say, I built that. And particularly with the kind of work that you guys do, you're creating those interior spaces that are aesthetically pleasing and something that people can actually enjoy being in.
That's right. We're a finished trade, so I go to these job sites right before we install our metal and glass, and they look like war zones, right? It looks bombed out. Our guys come in, happens to be that the sheetrock is being finished and the painter just showed up, the day after, and I'll come back 2 weeks later, and it's a beautiful office space. And that's so meaningful. And in terms of estimating, right? I see something on paper, and then I see pictures of the thing we built, and that's really satisfying.
That's great. So let's just explore a couple of different areas there in terms of the estimating, in terms of building a business. I know one of the emphasis that you're really focused on is this idea of customer service, and that's something that's not always highly emphasized in construction. So what are your thoughts around customer service and the importance of that?
I like to think of Amazon, right, or Zappos, right? I put in an order at Amazon, and I know that it's coming in 2 days or 1 day. I think they now have, right? Yep. And I recognize that architectural specialty glass and decorative glass is not going to come in 2 days because it takes longer than that. But I can go on Amazon.com and know exactly where my packages are and when I'm getting them, and having those expectations. As a customer, that feels great. I also know that I happen to be getting the best pricing at the detriment of other companies, of course, but that's a different conversation. But I think I hold Amazon and what that has created for my generation as the model of what the whole world is going towards, where we know when to expect something, how it's going to come in, the quality, the timing, the cost. I think all of those are why, for me, when I think about any business, I think about customer service. I know generations ago, it was you're going to get the glass when you get the glass. You're going to get your office when I feel like it. The world has changed, and I've said that to my team, that gone are the days of the contractor dictating the terms. I just think nobody operates in that mindset anymore. Yeah. And when my team questions that or challenges that, I say, do you guys use Amazon? Because and how's your experience with that? And that's all, we're always in agreement on that.
So it's interesting because I agree with you completely with Amazon. I think one of the reasons why they have become to dominate is because of their manic focus on the end user, on the customer, and delivering not only the best pricing, but the timeliness, and also, giving people the selection they want. And it's interesting to think about how you can take those lessons, particularly as a younger person, you take those lessons from the products and services that you use in different industries and bring them into the construction industry, taking from them what you can in terms of enhancing your business.
That's right. And I'm a big reader. So I read biographies and history a lot, and mostly because I'm not the first person to have this problem or have this experience, right? In all likelihood, whatever your challenge is, you're not the first person to experience this. Right. Look for patterns in successful people's lives and apply them to your situation. Look for patterns in successful companies, apply them to your company, whether it's Amazon or someone from history that you admire.
So let me ask you this as we're wrapping up here. What action items would you encourage someone who is young, they're just entering in, either they're coming out of college into a construction business, or like you, they've come into the business through their family connection. What would you say a younger person needs to focus on in their first 12 to 18 months in order to establish themselves and really set themselves up for success in the business?
So I think about myself as a teacher and learner, right? So you're asking about how am I a learner? Right. So I'd say each person learns differently. Know how you learn. Personally, I learned from reading and writing and reciting. Most people in the construction field are tactile learners. They need to touch the thing. They learn by doing it. That happens to not be how I learn. So for me, it's probably why I'm in estimating, because I read and I learn by reading and writing and drawing, right? Yep. And when I was a teacher, I bought 100 books in my first 2 years and read every single one on how to be a teacher, right? Unfortunately, those books don't exist for architectural metal and glass. I've looked, right? Most people learn a trade by doing it. So you have to figure out how you as a learner operate and figure out how do you acquire that knowledge. Most people acquire any skill in teaching, they call it 3 at-bats, 3 trials, right? You don't really know how to do something until you've done it at least 3 times. However you do it, whether it's I need to draw it out 3 times or I need to price something 3 different times before I really know what I'm doing, you need to learn how you are going to acquire the knowledge. So that would be my first thing. The second thing is just demonstrating humility, right? I think my generation struggles with humility, certainly in the construction field. It's just about saying, I don't know what I'm doing yet. I'd like to learn it, and I'd like to outwork my competition. Unless you're Einstein, Mozart, which you're not. Hard work can be your comparative advantage, right? Yep. So it's about humility, hard work, and figuring out how you will learn what you need to learn. By definition, you don't know what you don't know. So to figure out how you will acquire what you need to know is the big challenge in your first year or two.
Okay. And then here's another question that I think is really important. Lots of companies at the moment are going through transitions, and whether it be a family-based company or a company that's going through a buyout, where perhaps you have people in the business who are buying the business from the first generation. And one of the things I've noticed is the culture is going to be different from one generation to another because of the different people who are going to be running the business. This creates conflict often and challenge. And so how are you, as you grow into your leadership role, as you grow into, running the business eventually, how is it that you are managing the differences in culture that are evident and are going to be occurring? What are you doing there?
So I read a book about defining your values as a company. And so
which book is
I
that?
did a survey of pardon?
What was the book?
I don't recall, but I know Good to Great by Jim Collins is a big one that's cited. The most successful companies are ones who really define what their core principles are. And so anyway, I went out to define who we are. So I surveyed our whole team, and ultimately I got the exact answers from, not the exact verbatim, but pretty much the same thing. Hey, we're not a bunch of a-holes, right? That was one common theme. Quality, quality, quality. We're not going to put in glass that's scratched. We're not, and I would get a lot of examples. And ultimately, I wrote down the 4 values that who we currently are. Now, then the question is that who I want to be in the future? And the question is, yeah, I think it is, right? It happens to be that this company is built in the image of my dad. The future of the company will be built in my image. It happens to be that we're pretty aligned in those ways. And so it's about really defining who you are and who you want to be.
Right. So is there any differences do you find between what the company is now and what you think it will be in the future? And I'm not talking about strategically, I'm talking more about culturally. Is there one difference or 2 differences that you think will be evident, or do you think it'll be pretty much the same from generation to generation?
I think that the core values will remain the same, and the modalities at which we practice them will change. Okay. So for instance, one of our core values is flexibility. If you need our installation on a Tuesday, but then you call on Friday and say, actually, we need it Monday, we'll change our schedules around for that. Now, how we schedule things, whether we're using Outlook or whether we're using software or whether we're just using a notebook or no notebook at all, those modalities will change. But I happen to be in a company where the core values will remain the same. I imagine other companies wouldn't be like that.
That's very interesting. I think, what I think that speaks to, this is, and I'm just going to throw this out for the audience here. One of the reasons why companies struggle with transitions, particularly internal ones, is because the people that the first generation are transitioning the company to, the second generation, there is a clash in those values. And that creates a lot of unnecessary friction and challenge. And so just listening to what you're saying there, Andrew, one of the keys when you're transitioning the business is to make sure that there is, as much as possible, an alignment of values, because that will help to remove a lot of the conflict that happens between when a succession is taking place.
I think that's right.
So as we're wrapping up here, I always like to ask my guests, Andrew, you're in New York.
Yes.
Many people say New York is the greatest city in the world. And
agreed.
I know. I have actually never been to New York. One of these days I've got to get there. What I'd like to ask you though, Andrew, is what is your favorite place to eat in New York City? If I'm visiting New York City, what is the one place I need to go and visit?
Well, as I said before, I'm a big diner guy, and so I love any diner that looks like it's from 1950 and hasn't changed. So that would be my answer. I've visited at least 100 different diners in the greater New York area, and so I would say that would be my greatest recommendation.
Annie's Diner, and where's Annie's Diner?
No, any diner.
Oh, how do you spell that?
No, just like any old diner that you.
Oh, any diner. Any diner in New York City. Oh, that's a big recommendation. Oh, okay. So I thought you said Annie's Diner. That's beautiful. Any diner in New York City. Okay, so if I'm going to any diner in New York City, what are you ordering most of the time, Andrew? What is your favorite dish?
Oh, I'm an omelet guy.
An omelet guy. There you go. So,
yeah, but I don't want to go into ingredients because I don't want to polarize the audience.
There you go. No, we want to keep it nice and broad to the construction industry. Well, Andrew, I really appreciate your time. You know what I'm going to do here? I'm going to make a note of this. I think it'd be interesting to check in with you here in another 3 to 5 years and see how this transition's going. Because I
love it, Eric.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great idea because I think you've got some insights based on your other experiences, and I think it'll be really interesting to see what progress you make as you step into greater and greater leadership roles in the organization.
I appreciate that, Eric. Yeah, I'm in.
Awesome, great. Well, thanks very much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
All righty. This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership.